The Flay Barbarian is an absolute boss-killing monster. If you want to press the delete button on Uber Lilith and some tormented bosses, this is the build for you. Best news is, you don't even need a single Uber unique. I have a breakdown of the entire Lilith fight with some insane damage showcase, as well as a Tormented Duriel run with full parties. You have got to see this. I'm going to go over the Uber Lilith fight on a Flay Barbarian. I got my friends here because I wanted to give her a little bit more HP so you guys could really see what this build can do. To start off the fight, to take advantage of Intercom, you're going to pop Rallying Cry when you start. This will make you unstoppable. When you run up to basically where she lands, she's going to drop and does a knockback. If you get knocked back, you don't get to take advantage of this extra damage. When we run in, we pop Rallying Cry. As soon as she starts to land, we start attacking. You're going to start with War Cry, and then when you see the bar, you're going to watch your bleed go. The bleed is going to be like a lighter gray on her health bar. When that gets pretty much to dead, then you're going to pop Rupture. If she starts to actually take enough damage to get her close to 70%, you're going to Rupture, and then you're going to Rupture again. We have 2 Ruptures, and I'll cover how to do that when we get into the build guide setup. But for now, we're going to run in. I'm going to show you what the fight looks like. We're going to start as we run in. You're going to run in, you're going to pop Rallying Cry, and you're going to stand right here. You're going to pop War Cry, and you just start attacking. As soon as her health gets to about here, you're just going to pop Rupture, and then she dies. So now we want to make sure we reset all of our cooldowns. So we're running Hectic. You just sit here, and then you attack, and you wait for her to spawn. This is a really, really fun fight, but it takes a while to learn. This will not be like this when you first get into Flay. Flay takes a little while to learn, it takes a little while to get the gear up, but when she spawns again, same thing, you pop War Cry, and then when her health gets to here, we're going to pop Rupture, and then you can pop Rupture again, and that will take her down. I switched to a movement speed amulet always right here in the beginning, so this way I have enough movement speed to outrun the skulls. You always run around in a circle around the edge, because the skulls that are flying at you will go to where you're at the moment, not where you are. So they'll always be behind you as long as you have enough movement speed. When she cuts the platform, you just kind of stutter step a little bit around the edge until the platform clears. And then you run all the way around the top. She's going to fly back up in the air here. You want to get this timing down, stutter step a little bit so that the skulls are just behind you. Same thing here, just a little bit. And when the platform clears, you run around the corner. I always pop Rallying Cry right here, because this is where she does a little knockback right there. If you're unstoppable, it won't knock you back, and it won't have any chance of the skulls hitting you. You get outside of this little explosion, you come back in, you hit her a couple times, and then she dies. So that's the fight on a Flay Barbarian. I am not using a single Uber unique. We took the Shaco off for this. The only unique that I was running for this fight was Rage of Paragon. Now for this fight, you actually don't even need that. You can always just run a regular old legendary. You can put Might on it. Now this is the fight when you can get her down that quickly. You're going to run the same pattern, but as a Flay Barbarian, if you can get it so that your Flay duration is long enough, your critical strike chance is high enough, the fight looks like this. Now, we're going to go do a Tormented Duriel run, so you get to see what Duriel looks like. We'll do it with a full party, and then after that, we're going to hop into the details of the build, because it gets really, really fun when you start hitting really hard. For the Uber Duriel fight, when you first kill the ads, as soon as the ads are dead, we're going to do exactly what we did for the Lilith fight. You're going to run up here and you're going to pop Rallying Cry. This way, when he pops out and he knocks you back, you're going to stand still and you're going to take advantage of Intercom. I have my full party again here just so that we can get a little bit of extra life so you can see this build again. I'm going to spawn Duriel right now. This is going to be Tormented, level 200. More people you have in the party, you get 100% extra life as you do the fight. So that's why I wanted to put the party here together so that we can show off this build and then you guys can really see what the boss fight looks like. So we're going to build up here, then you're going to come up, and we're going to pop Rallying Cry. Start attacking, you're going to pop your War Cry, and then we're going to use Rupture, but I'm going to use Rupture twice. This way, you get the Rupture off twice in a row. It kills him very, very quickly. I could have let that bleed go all the way down to the bottom, but instead, we pop Rupture once, pop Rupture twice. It does bleed damage. Because we have Wanton Rupture up, it doesn't remove the bleed, and then when you pop it again, the bleed takes the rest of the life off. Nice and simple. The setup is exactly the same. We have no Uber uniques on. You can run this build completely without it. Now remember, this build does take a little while to get used to, and takes a little bit to get geared. This is not a starter build. It's something where you've already put some work into it, and you get yourself going. Now we're going to head over to the training grounds, and I'm going to cover the build in detail so you can see what we did. Good news is, if you've tried the Flay build that I put out already, you don't need to change much. That damage is pretty insane. Really, really fast boss kills. It makes everything really, really fun, really easy. You do billions of damage. If this is something that you want to try, switch to the Flay 2.0 version. It's going to be on the screen right here. If you've switched to this and you've gotten the hang of Flay, then you can put just a couple different aspects on, and then you can do exactly what you just saw. Now, I want to make sure that you guys know that Flay is not a starter build. It's not something that you can just hop right into and go. It actually took me days and days of learning the rotation, figuring it out, and then I had to set up the gear. Once I got my gear set up, and I'm not talking about masterworking to 8 or 10, I'm talking about masterworking every single piece of gear to 12. Whether it was perfect or not, you go straight to 12, and then you start working on each piece of gear. If you don't do that, you're going to feel weak, maybe squishy. You're going to go and you're going to die doing things that you want. Now, this version, again, is only for killing bosses. This is a variation that is going to be really, really handy when you're going to be fighting bosses, but only then. You can do some speed runs with this because you don't need to worry about pushing too high into the pits. But when you're pushing high into the pits, you're going to use the other variation of the Flay. All right, let's start with the skills. Because this build is going to be very similar to the other one, we're going to kind of breeze through this. If you want a full in-depth version of it, you can check out the other build. It is much more detailed than this is going to be. But we're going to start with 5 points into Flay. We're going to go all the way through Battle Flay. This will give us some vulnerable and then extra bleed damage as we attack. Coming down, we're going to go points into Opposing Presence, and then we're going to go points into Martial Vigor. We're going to take Rallying Cry. We're going to go all the way down through Strategic Rallying Cry. This is going to give us our Fortify. For the boss fight, we don't really need it all too much, but we also don't need the Fury generation. 1 point into Challenging Shout, and then Enhanced Challenging Shout. We're going to take War Cry. Now, we're going to go through Power War Cry, but we really don't need to take this because it's only going to be for groups of monsters, not for boss fights, but that's okay. Booming Voice is going to increase the duration of the shouts, which is really mainly only for War Cry. When we're doing bosses, we want to do as much damage as possible, so having War Cry up as long as possible is going to be super important. 1 point into Raid Leader, 3 points into Guttural Yell, 3 points into Aggressive Resistance. Because we need movement speed to run the Lilith fight, and if that's something that you're aiming to do, you need at least 155% movement speed to feel comfortable doing it. We're going to take 3 points into Swiftness. 3 points into Pit Fighter. Slaying Strikes, we're going to put 3 points here, just in case as you're learning this build and that boss's health is going down and you need that little extra oomph, you have this here. Rupture is where you're going to do the big damage. This one, we're going to go all the way down through Warrior Rupture. This is going to give us extra attack speed after we Rupture, but we really won't need it too much. We're going to just use Rupture, and most of the time the boss is just going to die right there. If not, like you saw, pop Rupture one more time, boss is dead. And 1 point to Hamstring, just so that we can unlock Cut to the Bone. This is going to increase the bleeding effects by 40%, and that's a multiplicative number, damage to vulnerable enemies. Now remember, Flay is going to create vulnerable enemies. Our Steel Grasp will also be creating vulnerable enemies, and we're going to be running the Exploit Cliff. So we're going to have vulnerable up all the time. Speaking of Steel Grasp, we're going to go 1 point into Steel Grasp, and we're going to go all the way down through Fighter Steel Grasp. You're going to use this because you want to be able to keep berserking up at all times. We're going to pop War Cry. That's going to give us berserking in the beginning. If you don't get the bleed up that you want right away, you're going to use Steel Grasp. That's going to give you your berserking some extra damage. 1 point into Thick Skin, 3 points into Counteroffensive for some extra damage. We're going to go into Heavy Handed. Now, Heavy Handed, this is actually kind of interesting. While using a two-handed weapon, you deal 15% increased critical strike damage. Now, this sounds like you're going to only do it when you're attacking, but it actually adds to your stat line. So if you come here and look, I have 2,000 critical strike damage. If we go back into our skills, and we're going to take just 3 points out of heavy-handed, when we look back at the stat line, we lose that critical strike damage. This is actually going to play a part into Gushing Wounds, which we're going to get into a second, by putting those points into heavy-handed. And finally, Gushing Wounds. The way that this works, Gushing Wounds takes your critical strike chance. My critical strike chance is going to be 68%. Now, that is actually a little low. You want to run a lot higher than that if you can. It requires a lot of greater affixes and some masterworking to hit on your critical strike chance, but you want to stack as much as you possibly can. The reason is, when you look at the skills and Gushing Wounds, it takes your critical strike chance, and I have 68%. So 68% of the time, it's going to take my critical strike damage, which is 2,000, and multiply that by 140%, and that's how much extra damage goes into my bleed. Now, Rupture takes your bleed, and it explodes all of that bleed damage that you've done, and it multiplies it with this version right here by 500%. That's why we're hitting so hard with this build, because that Rupture is taking all of our damage and all of the bleed that we're stacking in those times, multiplying all of that by 500%. And that is based around strength. So that's why I'm running all strength gems. So Gushing Wounds is incredibly important, and having high critical strike chance means that Gushing Wounds procs much more often, we get much more bleed, and we do a lot more damage. Going into the Paragon board, we only made one adjustment. I'm going to breeze through this real quick, and I'll show you what the one adjustment was. In your starter board, we're going to be running Exploit. Coming up into the Warbringer board, we're going to be running Executioner. This is going to give us 10% multiplicative numbers while we're using a polearms. So we're going to be hitting with a polearms, so we're going to talk about that more when we get into the gear and why we're using a polearms. But this is important because it's a multiplicative number. Anytime we can stack as many multiplicative numbers as we possibly can, even if they're 5, 6, 7, 8%, we want to be doing it. We're going to be running Executioner here. In your Blood Rage node, now Blood Rage will cap out at 30%. In order to hit that 30%, you need at least 300% damage while berserking. As we build this board, you want to either use your weapons, use your jewelry, or your Paragon board to stack extra damage while berserking. So I have nodes in my Paragon board that give me that damage while berserking, and as well as berserking duration. Keep berserking up, and so we hit our 30% multiplicative number here. In Blood Rage board, we're going to be running Might. This is going to be another multiplier. While we use a two-handed weapon, which is going to be our polearms, we're gaining another 8x. It's very important. Coming down, we're going to be going into our Decimator board. We are pretty much going to always have this 20% up. We make everybody vulnerable through Flay, the Exploit Glyph, and through Steel Grasp, and Rupture overpowers. This is going to give us 20x just having this legendary node. Inside this board, we're going to be taking Ire. Ire is going to give us that extra little bit of damage while berserking to get our Blood Rage node over that 30%, that we're sitting comfortably there. It also gives us a little bit of extra damage reduction from elites, which, as you saw in the boss fights, not super necessary, but while you're leveling Flay, and maybe you're going to start taking a little bit of damage, this will help you out here. Coming over into your Hemorrhage board, Hemorrhage is another multiplier that is exactly like Blood Rage. This season, this is uncapped. Last season, Blood Rage node was uncapped. You could go as high as you wanted with that multiplier. Now Blood Rage can only go to 30%. This will be changing in Season 5, but that's for another time. Right now, you can get that multiplier to go as high as you can by stacking vulnerable damage. Mine's at 77%. I'm trying to run about a 2-to-1 for this build. I'm trying to run 2 critical strike, 1 vulnerable. So if I have 2,000 critical strike damage, I want to have 1,000 vulnerable damage. This is going to be a really, really big multiplier for your bleed, because your bleeding damage is increased by 15% of your vulnerable damage bonus. That bonus, for me, is 77% X. In this board, we're going to be running Martial. In the instance where you use Rupture, and Rupture doesn't actually kill the boss, and you need Rupture to come back up again, you can use your shouts to reset the cooldown using the Martial Glyph. Every time you pop any shout, it's going to take anything that is cooling down that is not a shout, reduce that by 2 seconds. The last board, this is where we made our change. The only thing that we did here was that we changed to Blood Feeder. We were running Territorial here for a little bit of extra damage reduction. Because we don't need it for these boss fights, we're taking the extra 5% critical strike chance. Because, remember, that critical strike chance is incredibly important when you're running Gushing Wounds. Now, my 68% actually goes up to 73%. If I pop an elixir, I'm at about 80%. If I can get a couple more masterworking rolls on critical strike chance, I can start touching that 90% mark, which is going to be insane DPS. You're going to get all of that critical strike chance. Gushing Wounds is going to pop all the time. more bleed, more big rupture builds. It is really going to be crazy if we can get that gear worked out. That's Paragon Board. We're going to go take a look at the gear, aspects, and affixes. Looking at the aspects, affixes, and temper. You can run just a regular legendary here. This will actually allow you to add some extra strength, which will give you more to rupture. It's going to hit a little bit harder that way. You can fix your resistances here because a lot of time the resistances are hard to hit. If you do have a Shaco, I would suggest running the Harlequin's Crest because it will give you cooldown reduction, which you can get on a normal helmet too, but it also adds 4 ranks. So you can add more ranks to Flay so it can hit just a little bit harder, doing more damage with Flay. For the chest piece. Now, if you don't have a Rage of Haragoth, this is not necessary here. It is when you're going to be pushing the pits because the cooldown reduction that this gives you is absolutely amazing. You don't really need it too much when you're doing boss fights because the boss fights go so quickly. If you don't have this, you could put on a regular chest, and then with something like Numbing Wrath here, that will help generate more Fortify. And when you're over 50% Fortify, you'll actually get more damage from counteroffensive. So this is actually not a really bad option if you're going to be running boss fights, is to find a great chest piece and put Numbing Wrath on to give yourself more Fortify more quickly. So this way, when you get to that boss fight and you go to use that Rupture, you get all of the damage from counteroffensive too. For the gloves, and this was one of the changes that we made. This is how we're getting 2 Ruptures. We put Weapon Master on the gloves. Weapon Master, your weapon mastery skills have an additional charge. Rupture is a weapon master skill, and so is Steel Grasp. This I have tested a little bit in the pits, and is actually kind of fun when you're speedrunning because you have Rupture up all the time, you Steel Grasp all the time. You do lose out on a little bit of damage because we're not running something like Intercom or Elements here, but it actually does make the fights a lot of fun. So if you wanted to try this out while you're running, I would highly suggest it. At least give it a shot and see what it feels like. For the affixes here, you want to be running attack speed, critical strike chance, vulnerable. I wanted to get a double on this critical strike chance, maybe even a triple if I could, which is very, very hard, very costly, but I would settle for a double here. I'll be re-rolling this very soon. For the tempers, we're running crowd control duration. This is going to help your challenging shout. Just to talk about this a little bit, you won't need this as much in a boss fight, but it does actually help with stagger quite a bit. So if you're running to a boss fight that's taking a little bit longer, challenging shout is a huge form of stagger. Crowd control duration increases the taunt duration, which also increases the damage reduction duration that you have. I have 7.4 seconds here. When I pop it, all of the crowd control duration goes into effect and it lasts a little bit longer. Unfortunately, we do need to run the critical strike damage tempers. They're on a rogue. You have to level a rogue, find the legendary temper that allows you to do critical strike damage, put the gear that you want to temper into the bags, and then you have to pick it up on your rogue, temper it there, transfer it back to your barbarian through the stash. The critical strike damage, like we talked about with gushing wounds, is something that multiplies. So we have to do this in order to have those big hits. So heading down to the pants, we're going to be running Undying. Undying, every time that we cast a skill, we get life back. This won't be super necessary for boss fights. When we get into the pits, it is absolutely amazing, let me tell you. For the affixes, we want to be running Strength, Max Life, and ranks to Flay. If you can find a greater affix, it's best. If not, just find anything that you can on there for Flay. That would be perfect. Crowd control duration again, and then ranks of Imposing Presence. If you need to get your resistances max because you're not feeling it, you can trade either Strength or Max Life out here, and then you can put a Resistance affix there, and then that would cap you out. If you look at my resistances, I am very short on my Shadow Resistance. But if we took either Strength or Max Life here, and I re-rolled those to Shadow Resistance, I would be capped. Moving down to the boots, we are running Hectic. This is actually important for boss fights because if we need a cooldown to come up very quickly, this will do it. When I'm in the middle of that Lilith fight, is in between phases, I attack the air, and that helps reset all my cooldowns so that when she comes up for the second phase, I have all of my damaging abilities up. I pop them all again because I can do that with Hectic. Or your affixes, and I'm going to put this in the planner. I don't actually want to have the armor, movement speed, and the resistance all here. I want to spread those out a little bit because I want to have ranks of Warcry. If you have ranks of Warcry, then your Warcry is going to hit harder. You're going to do more damage, and then Rupture will hit much harder. But that's actually a really, really big bonus if you can find something with that on it. For the tempers, I did not want barrier generation here. This is bricked, but you will want the same exact thing. You're going to be running crowd control duration and then movement speed, because movement speed for boss fights is very important. For the weapon, this is where we're going to be kind of bouncing around a little bit, but it's going to alternate. For my build, like I said, I want to run 2-to-1 for critical strike damage and vulnerable damage. So I wanted to have most of my weapons have either critical strike damage on 2 and then vulnerable damage on the other 2. I run the critical strike temper on all of them to help get me to that 2-to-1, and then vulnerable damage as one of the affixes. So for this one, we're running strength, max life, critical strike damage. The Flay duration is a very tough one, and that's what makes this build not a starter build. It's hard to hit that Flay duration. And then on top of it, you need to hit multiple masterworking on it. So I have 2 here. I wanted to hit 2 Flay, and then 2-1 on the critical strike damage. Preferably the temper, because the temper is higher. So if I went 2 masterworking into Flay, and then 1 into the critical strike damage temper, this would have been amazing. I got close, but we're not there yet. We're not perfectly min-maxed, but that's okay, because if you see that, we're still hitting really hard, we're still pushing into the pits, and we're killing bosses very quickly. For the aspect, we're going to be running Moonrise. This is going to give us extra attack speed, which is important, because the more attack speed we get, the more Flay that we can put onto the boss, and then the harder that we're going to hit when we use Rupture. This also gives us 160% increased damage to Flay after we've attacked 5 times, and Flay hits pretty quickly, so we're going to get this up very, very fast. For the other weapon, we're running Edge Masters here. This is where we alternated to vulnerable damage, affix, strength, max life, Flay duration, and then critical strike damage. I did not get my double roll here. I was hoping for it. I still have to re-roll my weapons, but I've been trying for a couple days now, but that's just the way the game goes. For the other weapon, we're going to be running Wanton Rupture. This is actually really important for the boss fights when you're running 2 Rupture charges. The first one will not remove your bleed. What Wanton Rupture does is that it allows you to use Rupture without removing the bleed. Normally, Rupture, after you use it, it takes all of the bleed off, and then that does the damage. Wanton Rupture takes all of the bleed damage that is there, does damage to it, but leaves it on. Because we now have 2 charges, you can do 1 Rupture, it takes all of that potential bleed, does a lot of damage, and leaves it on. So now you still have all of that bleed damage remaining. You've done a ton of damage to the boss. You pop Rupture again, and then boom, boss dies. I demoed it during the Duriel fight so that you could see what it looked like when we used 2. So if you want to see what it looks like when you use that second Rupture, go back to the Duriel fight and take a look. For the affixes, we're going to be running strength, max life, and I put vulnerable on this one. Damage while berserking, because we want to hit our 300 cap, which I hit perfectly. We were just at 300 right here. So this is exactly what you want to do. 300.0. Perfect. And you're going to be running Flay duration, which again, you want to try and get a double. For the slashing weapon, we're going to be running a polearm here. And we'll cover the reason that we're going to be using a polearm when we get to the expertise section after this. But this is going to be super important because this is going to give us an extra boost in damage. We're going to be running strength, max life, vulnerable damage on this, Flay duration, and then critical strike damage. It's all going to be the same. We want to hit the double masterworking on your Flay duration. For the aspect here, we're going to be running Berserk Ripping. In the pit pushing version, we have Wanton Rupture on your 2-handed weapon so that it comes up more often, so that we can rupture more often, so that we do those big hits more often. For the boss fights, we're not going to be lasting that long, so we only need to do 1, maybe 2, and then that will be enough to get through the bosses. So this is why we have Wanton Rupture here. What Berserk Ripping does is that while we're berserking, and remember, you gain berserking from Warcry, and you gain berserking from Steel Grasp. While we're berserking, 60% of the damage that we inflict is converted into bleed. So while we're berserking, which means that as soon as you pop Warcry or you pop Steel Grasp, all of that damage, it takes 60% of that and it puts it into your bleed. This is really important that we put this on here because that's going to give us that extra bleed that we need to get the boss's health down and then rupture once or twice. For the ring, we're going to be running Rapid. This is going to give us a little bit of extra attack speed. We're going to have attack speed, critical strike chance, critical strike damage, Warcry cooldown reduction, and then damage while berserking here. This is going to push us over that edge. I had to take it here instead of on the weapons because I wanted to run the bigger critical strike damage bonuses. For masterworking here, I wanted to get a critical strike chance, not the attack speed, so this will be re-rolled again. In the planner, I will have where to put the masterworking if you possibly can get it. I'm going to not put triple rolls in the planner. Critical strike chance, though, the closer you can get to 100, the better. So remember, if you get a triple on this, on a critical strike chance roll, perfect. For the other ring, we're going to be running Intercom. This is what I was talking about by standing still. You pop Rallying Cry, it allows you to stand still in front of the boss, and will give you up to a 30% multiplier instead of just a 10%, which is there all the time. For the affixes, I didn't want strength. I actually wanted to run vulnerable damage here, but this is the only ring that I had. So I'm running strength, attack speed, critical strike chance. What you want to be running is vulnerable damage, attack speed, critical strike chance, Warcry cooldown reduction, and then damage while berserking again, and this got me exactly to my 300%. For the amulet, we're going to be running adaptability. When you cast a skill at or above 50% maximum resource, which we're going to be gaining maximum resources all the time because Flay is a generator. We are spending 0 fury. We're going to be doing 120% increased damage with Flay. Really, really important because we want to be doing more damage with Flay so that we can do more bleed. For the affixes, we're going to be running attack speed, critical strike chance, and cut to the bone. This is a very hard amulet to get. I have never traded anything or sold anything, but from what I hear, they're very expensive to buy. If you can't find this right here, strength is a great option. Attack speed, critical strike chance, and strength because you're going to be putting extra damage into Rupture, which is going to be doing a lot of damage already for you. This amulet here, I did not want to brick it, so instead of taking the risk and getting critical strike damage as a temper, I went with straight damage and I just left it there. So if you can get critical strike damage on this as a temper, then you are good to go. I put imposing presence here, but there is also the option to put resistance here if you're not capped and you feel like you're dying a lot and you need to get your resistance capped. But if you can run with imposing presence, it's going to be really, really beneficial because you're going to have extra life. For the expertise, this is where we're going to talk about the polearms, and let's talk about how expertise works. When you mouse over or you select on a controller any of these, it gives you 2 options. One of them is what you're going to get while you're using the weapon. The other one is what you're going to get when you have this selected. If I have two-handed axe selected and I'm using a two-handed axe, I will be gaining 10% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. We'll also be gaining 10% increased critical strike chance to vulnerable enemies. But we're not running a two-handed axe. We're running a polearm. With the polearm, you deal 15% increased damage while healthy. Healthy means that you're above 80% life. If you read the tooltip down below where it says assign technique, right below there, it tells you exactly what healthy means. While we're above 80% life, we do 15% multiplicative increased damage. If I was to put this polearm's expertise on, that will give me the 15% increased lucky hit chance. I don't have that all the time. I only have that while I'm using the polearm expertise. Because I'm using the polearm expertise and I select the two-handed axe expertise, I now gain that 10% increased damage to vulnerable enemies, even though I'm using a polearms. So the expertise allows you to gain benefits from other weapons while you're not using those weapons. This is why we're running two-handed expertise, because it's the only one that is going to give us straight damage when we're not using a two-handed axe and we're using other weapons. That makes this one the most used in every single build that's out there. We're going to head to the training grounds. I'm going to show you what the gameplay loop looks like. You got to see it in the boss videos, but I'm just going to run it through really, really quick so you can see it in action, and we'll explain it as we go. So in order to do the gameplay loop, the first thing that we're going to do is you're going to pop Warcry, and then you're just going to start using Flay. If you watch the dummy's health, it goes down really, really fast. And this is about the time where we're going to pop our Flay, which did 5 billion damage, and if you need to do it again, you pop Flay again and another 5 billion damage. This scales up tremendously the more you attack. The more you attack, the harder it hits, and as you can see, our duration is so long, but we're still stacking bleed. When you're doing your boss fights, you pop Flay, you start attacking, and then when you see this little gold ring around Rupture, that means that Wanton Rupture is ready to go. You hit the button, and if it doesn't die right away, you hit Rupture one more time, and it's pretty much guaranteed to die. You saw 10 billion in like 2 seconds. None of the bosses out there have that much life, so you will absolutely 100% kill them. You can show off to your friends, you can get out there, kill those bosses. Let me know what you think of the build. If you haven't checked out the Flay 2.0 version, check it out. It's going to be in the description below. I'll have the planner down there too. This is a ton of fun. It hits really hard. Just the best way to get out there and get some bosses. Get yourself... Hey. like I said, it's the best way to get out there, kill some bosses. So let me know what you think in the comments. I'm live on YouTube and Twitch pretty much every night. I would love to hear what you think of the build. Come theorycraft with me. If you have a version that you're running that you absolutely love, let me know. Hopefully, I'll see you there.